I went outside today and I gotta be honest, the fresh air did wonders for me. The changing of the seasons, it's magical. Just go out there and take a nice deep breath in and smell that pleasant Florida air, that wonderful, unforgettable aroma that smells like 5 septic tanks all overflowing at once. And while I was outside today, I had an epiphany. I've been forgetting to do a lot of important shit. Not like basic stuff like hygiene, brushing my teeth, wiping my ass. No, something far more important. I'm talking about the moist meter. The moist meter is viewed as the only scientifically accurate opinions to ever exist, and I have a responsibility as the lead researcher of the moist meter to deliver high quality reviews of movies, TV shows, and games, but I've been slacking a little bit. And not on purpose. Stream keeps calling me out on it, and it just now hit me like, yeah, I've forgotten to moist meter a lot of really big shit that I did watch, such as Rings of Power. I did watch all of Rings of Power, by the way, but it was so painfully, mind-numbingly mid, I just completely forgot to moist meter it. So I thought today would be a good opportunity just to go through like a quick review of all of the big stuff I've watched recently that I never moist metered because I just forgot to. Now, since I already brought it up, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. There's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. But let's talk about how mid Rings of Power was. And I'm being a little generous calling it mid because I thought it was bordering on pretty bad very often throughout the show. There was just glimmers of hope where I was like, damn, this had a lot of potential. But overall, I would say it just wasn't very good. I didn't hate it as much as most people seem to. And I think that's because I've never read Tolkien's work. I'm just a massive Lord of the Rings fan. I think the Lord of the Rings trilogy from Peter Jackson is the best trilogy ever made. And yes, I do put it above the original Star Wars trilogy. I truly think it is a timeless masterpiece. All three of those movies are absolutely beautiful. And I'd argue damn near perfect. And I also love a lot of the spin-offs that came from that universe in terms of like their games back in the PS2 era, even the old Xbox 360 games. Then you also have some more modern ones like Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor. Like the Lord of the Rings series has given me a lot of media that I absolutely love. But it's also given us some stinkers like The Hobbit, the Hobbit trilogy. I don't think those were unwatchably bad, but they were significantly worse than Lord of the Rings. And I get that it wasn't like entirely Peter Jackson's fault. There's apparently a lot of drama surrounding the production of these films, so we just ended up with something less than stellar. But I do think Rings of Power is the worst big budget, big scale Lord of the Rings production we've received so far. Of course, there's worse Lord of the Rings media, such as like the old 80s Lord of the Rings show, which was an absolute abomination, as well as like some shovelware from back in the day on PlayStation. But overall, I do think Rings of Power just didn't do anything well. I don't know if it's because they're trying to set themselves up for later seasons, so they just played it very safe here, or what necessarily went wrong, but the show is just extremely boring. It doesn't feel like you're watching a $1 billion show. That's right, the show is a $1 billion production. It doesn't feel like that at all. At times, it feels like I'm watching a high school theatrical piece. For example, that now infamous scene from the show in Numenor where Galadriel imprisons 4 guards after they like unlock the cell, and she just fucking like Wing Chuns them real quick like Dale from Detroit Urban Survival Training. Somehow like maneuvers around all of them, pushes them in the cell and locks it and walks away. Like it's super, super goofy many times throughout this show. When it's not supposed to be. It's not like self-aware silliness. It's like, oh, this is supposed to be badass. But it falls flat on its face. But that's not like the worst part, that's just a bad scene. I think overall the character writing just isn't very good. They make Galadriel very, very unlikable. I'm someone who's not familiar with that character outside of Lord of the Rings movies, so I don't really know the Tolkien accurate lore or anything. But even not knowing that, I didn't really like her because she was just so robotic almost. I didn't even feel like I was watching a character. I felt like I was watching an android read lines. And I'm not blaming the actress. I don't think it's like her fault, but the character was just written so poorly in a way where it didn't even feel natural. Like just always confrontational and standoffish with everybody for no reason. Even people that were there to just help her. She's like, oh, well, fuck you anyway. And it's just, I don't know. She was just like this broken record of have to find Sauron, have to kill him, must destroy darkness. And she's far from the only poorly written character in the show, but she was the one that stood out the most since she's really kind of like the focal point here. I wouldn't necessarily call her like the protagonist since there's multiple storylines that it follows throughout that all kind of converge in the overarching plot. But she did have probably the most screen time, so it was the one that really stood out. Overall, just the writing was poor. It just wasn't very good, unfortunately. And even though I didn't like her as a character, I liked when she fights. There were scenes where she fights that were pretty cool, such as when they finally do encounter orcs and she's on horseback doing some flashy shit. That was pretty cool, but there's very little of that happening in this show. There's very little of anything happening in this show, really. It's just really stale conversations between characters vomiting exposition into each other's mouths like a baby bird feeding their child. There's good moments. I think the overall best episode is episode 6 because it's just a full-blown battle that goes on for almost the entire duration of the episode, and it's well done. Like, they actually did that whole episode pretty well. I enjoyed that one thoroughly. But that's the only, like, great episode throughout the entire series. And I definitely need to mention this. I think the entire Harfoot storyline was miserable. Every time we'd go from something to the Harfoots, I'd just roll my eyes and just be like, yep, here it comes. Time to fucking engage in my own little battle here to try and stay awake watching the Harfoots for the next 30 minutes. Absolutely nothing interesting happens with the Harfoots. Until the very end, kind of. And even then, it's not because of the Harfoots. They just happen to be there to watch something interesting happen. Oh my god, I could not stand the entire Harfoot storyline. It felt like they just shoehorned all of that in there because they knew they needed some kind of Hobbit-adjacent, like, storyline. Since, you know, Hobbits were so crucial to Lord of the Rings, and of course The Hobbit. It just felt like completely aimless, though, with all of the Harfoot stuff going on. A lot of my really big complaints are going to fall into spoilers, and I'm not going to be spoiling anything, so these were just some, like, general points that I thought the show kind of failed on. So just going to plug Rings of Power into the Moist meter now. I'm going to give it a 45%. Just a little below average and mediocre. Like, I didn't full on hate it or anything, but I certainly wouldn't say I overall enjoyed the journey here. So anyway, that's the